I have to say this so I don't get banned. Disclaimer. This is for educational purposes. Do not try this at home, bro. I'm gonna say all the slurs for bad poets, and I'm gonna speedrun it. Doggerlist, balladmonger, versemonger, rhymester, versifier, poeticule, bardlet, poetling, sonneteer, poetape, poetaster. That was about 10 years. I think this might be the first on YouTube because you usually get banned.
We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Poetry Action Committee. A poetry disaster has occurred at Andrews McMeel Publishing on October 6, 2015. Doggerel has reached unsustainable levels. Please remain in your homes. This is an emergency action notification. This is poetry taught poorly.
Greetings, slur singers. This is Poetry Taught Poorly, where we teach you everything around poetry, on poetry, in poetry, albeit poorly. So today we're going to be seeing whether the slur of old, being poetaster or poetaster, whatever you prefer, should be brought back. Because racial slurs are lame, but slurs about merit and ability, based. We are going to look into the origin and the story of this forgotten poetry slur. What is the definition of a poetaster? Poetaster combines the prefix poeta, which means poet, and aster, considered to mean second-rate or bad. So you combine poeta aster, you get poetaster. So second, third-rate poet. George O'Neill wrote a piece on what it means to be a poetaster, and he had this to say about it.
Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty.
What marks him out, then, we would now say, is not so much the weakness of his means, or the insignificance of his aims, or the faultiness of his execution, or even all these together, so much as pretense and affectation. He feigns passion when there's no real feeling, imaginative vision when there's only echoing of other people's words, inspired utterance where there's but deliberately contorted prose. He is cousin to the false prophets of old who persist in repeating, "Thus saith the Lord," when the Lord hath not spoken.
What does that make you if you've lied?
So there's an important nuance here. Poetasters are not just bad and sucky poets. They are poets who think they speak with the voice of God. They think they're amazing. They're delusional. They pretend to have all these things, but they know in their heart that they are not. So that's what makes poetasters different from just being a bad poet. The first known use of poetaster was through the great theologian and scholar and philosopher Erasmus, but it did not really get popularity in the English language until the play Poetaster by Ben Jonson. To give some context, Ben Jonson is considered the second greatest dramaticist from the Elizabethan era, second behind only Mr. Willie Shakespeare. But the play Poetaster occurred during a time called the Poetomachia, or the War of the Theaters. And you can kind of think of the War of Theaters as a rap beef between Ben Jonson and two of his rivals, John Marston and Thomas Dekker. Now the whole thing kind of occurred because the government, through the bishop's ban, banned satire from appearing in prose and poetry. So no verse, no fiction. Can you be satirical? The only option left was playwriting. So these people began writing plays about each other that were essentially dissing them while also making art out of it. If I had to do a comparison between the Drake and Kendrick beef, I would say Poetaster kind of fit as the BBL Drizzy. BBL Johnson. It was kind of popular, but it wasn't the most significant play by far from the Poetomachia. Only looking at this through the lens of being a rap beef, I think, does the play Poetaster disservice. Poetaster is not only a diss track, it has an artistic statement. An important statement about how envy is a corruptive force against art. It touches upon the duties that the poet has to poetry, the duties society has to poetry, and the power of poetry itself. So with that context out of the way, let's get into the summary of Poetaster.
To get you started with
Poetaster.
watching, all you really need is enthusiasm, your eyes and your ears. You can just watch in your own front and backyard, and of course you can go and visit your local reserves.
So Poetaster is set during the Roman times when Augustus Caesar was the guy. He was the man. The whole play follows Ovid, Virgil, and Horace, who are the big three. And funny enough, Jonson writes himself to be Horace. No ego there at all. Very beginning of the play, you have the embodiment of envy come down and say, yo, this play sucks. You should all cast your evil eye towards this play that Jonson wrote and destroy it. You should take it out. But then Envy's chased away at the end of her little speech because she's like, oh, wow, this work has so much artistry in it, and the artist has so much confidence in his ability and his muses that I can't just do anything. I gotta run, I gotta leave. So Envy leaves, and it goes into Ovid writing a poem. And that poem pretty much says that poems that I make will kind of outlive me and will help me make fame. Then comes in his daddy, Ovid Sr., a commander of the Romans named Tuca, and a tribune named Lupus Asinus, which just means wolf ass, or ass wolf. And they all pretty much just says, hey, Ovid, be a lawyer. Being a poet ain't got no money. You're gonna be broke forever, and I don't want to take care of you. And they all dunk on poetry and say, poets, ain't no pecunia in that game. Which is true, but that's a different story. That first act ends with Ovid reciting the poem that he was making.
The suffering plowshare or the flint may wear, but heavenly poesy no death can fear. King shall give place to it in kingly shows, the banks o'er which gold-bearing Tagus flows. Kneel hinds to trash, me let bright Phoebus swell, with cups full flowing from the muses' well. Frost-fearing myrtle shall impale my head, and of sad lovers I be often read. Envy the living, not the dead, doth bite. For after death all men receive their right. Then, when this body falls in funeral fire, my name shall live, and my best part aspire.
He just reads this poem and says, you know what, I'm going to stick to my ideals. In the second act of the play, you're introduced to this character named Crispinus. We're just going to call him Crispy, alright? But Crispy is shown trying to engage in some adulterous acts with some guy who knows his wife. And while he's trying to smooth talk her and everything, the girl's like, hey, I think poets are hot. This married woman. This leads Mr. Crispy to say, hey, I can be a poet for you, babe. Or I can be a poet for you, cockatrice. Just to let you know what I learned from this play is that cockatrice means babe in Elizabethan times. He now suddenly gets the urge to become a poet upon hearing this thing, and he thinks he's hot shit. So then he goes in, he hangs out with Ovid, who's having a relationship with the daughter of Augustus Caesar, Julia, which is a big no-no. They just hang out, do like a little poetry reading. Everyone's like, yay, Crispy, but we're just gonna give you praise because we're nice. We're not gonna say anything bad about you. And that emboldens Crispy a little bit to take this poetry thing a little bit further. So then the third act comes along. You see Horace in the street trying to write a poem, and then Crispy just comes at him and starts harassing him, ultimate fanboying him, and say, hey, can I show you my mixtape? And he just won't get off his back. Horace gets fed up with him. It's just a constant back and forth. He can't get rid of him. And then Crispy has the audacity to suggest to him, says, hey man, I know that this guy is kind of your benefactor and giving you all the money to write your poems. How about you let me get a little bit of that action, and I'm gonna cut out those other people so we can have all the stuff to ourselves. So Crispy, very conniving, and Horace eventually says GTFO. And he's only able to say GTFO because Crispy gets arrested for not paying a debt he owes for sweet meats, whatever that may be. The commander from the beginning that talked trash to Ovid bails Crispy out and says, hey, I got a plan to make money and to connive our way up the Roman hierarchy so we can get paid. How can we get rid of these poets and move our way up in the world? So they begin plotting, him and a couple other characters. One that you would need to know named Demetrius. Fourth act, Ovid and his poetry gang with Horace and his girl Julia come up with an idea to create a mock god party where they all dress up like Olympians and have a good time and do a symbolic act to say like, oh, our work will deify us. But then, they're being ironic with it because they don't actually think they're going to be deified. They're deified because they do talk trash about each other. So it's just a little playful satiric thing they're doing amongst themselves. And they see Tuca, Crispy, and their gang, and they just said like, you want to come along for this ride, it's a good party, welcome to join. Immediately when they do that, Tuca's like, I'm gonna say that this party is a act of treachery of them trying to usurp Augustus Caesar, and I'm gonna say it's them profaning the gods themselves. So he sends word to Caesar while they're busy partying and have a good time. Another lesson from this story: snitching is a no-no. Augustus Caesar comes in and he says, like, what the heck are you doing? This party's a mess. And then he starts chewing out all the poets involved, and he gets so angry at the sight of Ovid with his daughter. He's like, I'm gonna have to kill Julia now for her honor, and I'm just gonna flip. But then they manage to calm him down a little bit, doesn't kill Julia, but he banishes Ovid from Rome forever. He's exiled. And then it's a final goodbye love scene between Ovid and Julia, where they really say some really sweet, beautiful words.
Me, that virtue whose brave eagle's wings with every stroke blow stairs and burning heaven, should, like a swallow, praying toward storms, fly close to earth, and with an eager plume pursue those objects which none else can see, but seem to all the world the empty air. Thus thou, poor Ovid, and all virtuous men must prey like swallows on invisible food, pursuing flies or nothing, and thus love. And every worldly fancy is transposed by worldly tyranny to what plight it list.
But they just say goodbye to each other, and that's the last we ever see of Ovid and Julia. Then the fifth act makes a weird turn. Julius Caesar throwing a gathering where he's like, oh my god, poetry is awesome because it helps things live forever, and the ideals of the Roman Empire live within it too, and it's just able to make things stick. And so he's inviting Virgil over to do a reading, and Horace is there, but he's trashing Horace a little bit. He's like, you're not that guy. But he's really excited when Virgil comes. He gives him a seat higher than him to give his reading, and Virgil starts to read the poem from the Aeneid. Out of nowhere, what do you know? Tuca, Lupus, Asinius, and gang busting down the door with Crispy, saying, hey, we got another treacherous plot. And Caesar's like, okay, what is it? And turns out it's BS, but it's overtly BS this time. Ain't nothing getting away from it. Or Julius Caesar gets mad at them and he punishes everybody. But for the poets Crispinus and Demetrius, he says, Horace, you can be in charge of their sentencing and their court hearing. You can do this. So you can arraign them, name drop. You can begin the arraignment, which is the name drop of the play. Horace begins a trial on them, and he sentences Crispinus to drink some elixir that makes him vomit up all the big words that he's been using in his poems that suck so bad. So you just see all these big words coming out of him. Demetrius pretty much admits, I only did this because your poems were better than me, and I was jealous of all the stuff you had with friends, company, and how people loved your work. They're both sentenced and imprisoned a little bit, but Horace also gives Crispinus an outline of what he should do if he wants to become a good poet before sending them away. And then Augustus Caesar says,
we have indeed, you worthiest friends of Caesar, It is the bane and torment of our ears to hear the discords of those jangling rhymers that, with their bad and scandalous practices, bring all true arts and learning in contempt. But let not your high thoughts descend so low as these despised objects. Let them fall. With their flat groveling souls, be you yourselves, and as with our best favors you stand crowned, so let your mutual loves be still renowned. Envy will dwell when there is want of merit, though the deserving man should crack his spirits. Blush, folly, blush. Here's none that fears the wagging of an ass's ears, although a wolfish case he wears, detraction is but baseness's varlet. And apes are apes, though clothed in scarlet.
Yes, remain confident in your poetic ability. Poets are awesome. And that's pretty much the play. You can avoid being a poetaster with these simple steps. So what are the two lessons in the poetaster that I took away? One is we got to be able to identify what a poetaster is, and society has a duty to protect the good poets and uplift them. Let's look at what makes a Crispinus. What makes a Crispy? First off, skips leg day. That shows a profound lack of judgment on his part. How will he pick up the cockatrices looking like that? Second, he is a buffoon. He's shown to think he's better than he is because he just decided on a whim to be a poet, and he thinks he is the guy now. He thinks he's Ovid. He thinks he's Virgil without putting any of the work in. And we can see he desires status because he attempts to worm his way up into the poetry echelons by conniving rather than with skill. And he plagiarizes other work or mimics them horribly. It's none of him. It's just poor imitations of others. And we can see he uses big asinus words that he doesn't understand because he wants to create an image of a good poet rather than being a good poet. So at the center of a poetaster is envy of people who are their betters without the ability to get there. So we gotta be wary of the poetasters. If you go to any poetry reading, you will see them. But we got to make sure that we ourselves aren't crispy, and we got to be able to identify the crispy people. Gotcha? Maybe that will be the new slang, crispy.
What's the greatest lesson a woman should learn? That since day one, she's already had everything she needs within herself, and it's a world that convinced her she did not.
She did not. She did not.
So what does a real-life poetaster look like? There was one poet named Gordan Coogler who fits the definition of poetaster through and through. So he was a self-taught American poet from South Carolina who published 5,000 short collections of poems. And I don't care how good you think you are, if you're putting out that much work, some of it's bound to be bad, right? So here are a few poems from Mr. Coogler. Pull off those suspenders. Sweet girl, I like to see you look the very best you can. But please do not try so soon to imitate a man. You are not masculine or neuter, neither of those genders. Therefore, I advise you to pull off those suspenders. 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 A pretty girl. On her beautiful face there are smiles of grace that linger in beauty serene, and there are no pimples encircling her dimples as ever as yet I have seen. This poem's funny to me in that this person's great muse that he talks about is pretty much just a pretty person, and I've never seen that pretty person have a pimple. Like, that's it. That's the whole poem. This poem is essentially a Zapsit ad. Like, what? Come on, Coogler. We know you can do better. And here's a poem of his where he's lambasting his critics for not getting him. You'll never see this head too large for my hat. You watch it and feel it as oft as you choose, but you'll learn as millions of people have learned of my character and name through my innocent muse. You'll never see this form clad in gaudy apparel, nor these feet playing the dude in patent leather shoes, but your children's children will someday read some pleasant quotations from my innocent muse. What symptoms of a poetaster does Coogler have? Well, first, he mimics other poets by saying, okay, I can see that poems are supposed to have a rhyme scheme, so I'm just going to do some rhyme scheme with some words, even though they might not fit or they might clash, because that's what I think poetry is. He is delusional in that he thinks that his work is actually super amazing. He is not putting the work in to get better, and he's very harsh against people that criticize him. He is saying, like, the fault of you not appreciating the poem is you, the reader, not his own work. And his inability to accept that and make the changes while also believing he is some god tier poet makes him crispy, makes him a poetaster. And I would even say deep fried crispy, burnt to a crisp. From Ben Jonson's play, we know that we can call people poetasters and we can call people bad or inferior poets. But when we do so, we must do it from a place of love for poetry. We must never use that word because of jealousy we may have towards a poet or from a place of ignorance. Because if you do, you're acting crispy. And if you're acting crispy, you should get dealt with swiftly. And you'll be hit with a poetaster yourself. So use the word, but use it from a place of knowledge and love for poetry itself. Thank you guys for watching Poetry Taught Poorly. Do you think Poetaster will never make a comeback into use? Do you think it even should be used? Should we even call people out for being bad poets? Is being a bad poet subjective? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you again for watching Poetry Taught Poorly. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Don't be crispy. Thanks, guys.